For 23 years, I told people my wife destroyed our marriage. I believed every word. Her name was Diane. We were married for 31 years. We raised 2 children, built a home, and shared a lifetime together. Then one Tuesday evening when I was 53, I came home and found a suitcase by the front door. Diane was sitting quietly at the kitchen table. She wasn't crying. I was angry. "What is this?" I asked. She looked exhausted. "I'm leaving, Richard." I laughed because I thought she was trying to scare me. Diane wasn't dramatic. She never yelled. She never threatened divorce. "Leaving where?" I asked. "I don't know yet." That answer made me furious. I started reminding her of everything I'd done for our family. The house, the bills, the vacations, the children's education, the years I worked overtime. Finally, I asked, "What more did you want from me?" Diane looked at me for a long moment. Then she quietly said, "You." I frowned. "I've been here for 31 years. She slowly shook her head. "No, Richard, you haven't." Then she said the words that haunted me for the next 23 years. "I don't think you ever really saw me." She picked up her suitcase. I could have stopped her. I could have asked her to stay. I could have asked what I'd missed. Instead, I stepped aside. Pride is a dangerous thing. Convinces you that protecting your ego matters more than protecting the person you love. I opened the door. "If you walk out," I said, "don't expect me to come after you." Diane didn't argue. She simply looked sad. "I know," she whispered. Then she walked away. I watched her drive out of our street. That was the last night she ever lived in our home. For months, I waited for her to come back. I was certain she'd change her mind. She never did. Our daughter Emily visited often. One evening, while I complained about Diane, Emily quietly interrupted. "Dad, Mom didn't decide this overnight." I stared at her. She'd been unhappy for a long time. I felt betrayed. Everyone seemed to know except me. So I created a story that protected me. I was the good husband. Diane was the one who walked away. I worked. I provided. I stayed faithful. What more could she possibly want? I repeated that question for 23 years. Then last October, Emily called. "Dad, I found a box that belonged to Mom." Inside were photographs in 3 notebooks. I almost threw them away. Instead, I opened the first one. At first, there were grocery lists and little notes about daily life. Then I found my name. "Richard came home exhausted tonight. I made his favorite dinner. He barely spoke. I hope work gets easier for him." A few pages later, "Richard got the promotion. The kids and I bought a cake. He came home too late, so we ate it without him." I remembered the promotion. I remembered buying myself a watch. I didn't remember the cake. That's when I realized something that frightened me. I had spent 31 years believing I knew my wife, but as I turned those pages, I was meeting a woman I had never truly seen. I read until nearly 2 in the morning. The coffee beside me had gone cold. I never noticed. At first, the notebooks were filled with ordinary life. Birthdays, school events, grocery lists. Then the pages began to change. Every few entries, there was me. One page stopped me cold. "Mom called today. The doctors found something. I'm scared." I remembered Diane's mother. Cancer. I remembered the hospital, the funeral. I remembered taking time off work. For years, I believed that proved I had been there for my wife. Then I read the next page. I tried to tell Richard how frightened I was. He told me not to worry. He wanted to fix the problem. I didn't need a solution. I just needed my husband. I closed the notebook. I remembered that evening. I honestly believed I was helping. But Diane wasn't asking for advice. She wanted someone to carry the fear with her. I never understood the difference. The next notebook brought me to our 25th anniversary. I remembered canceling dinner because of work. I'd always told myself she understood. She didn't. Her diary said, "I wore the blue dress Richard loved." I waited alone at the restaurant. After 20 minutes, I went home. I stopped breathing for a second. I never knew she had gone. For almost 30 years. I never knew. Later that night, I brought home flowers. I'd always remembered those flowers. Diane remembered the empty chair across from her. We had lived through the same evening, but remembered completely different stories. As I kept reading, I realized something else. Diane slowly stopped asking me for anything. She stopped asking me to take walks. She stopped asking me to sit on the porch. She stopped asking me to come home early. I thought our marriage had become peaceful. It hadn't. She had simply stopped believing I would hear her. Then I found 4 short lines that changed everything. Richard asked why I don't talk anymore. I've spent years trying. I think I've finally learned not to. I read those words again and again. Suddenly I understood. Silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's surrender. I opened the final notebook. These entries were different, shorter, quieter, almost empty. Diane wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't even disappointed. She had already begun letting go. Then I found one sentence. Just one. "I miss my husband, and he is sitting 6 feet away from me." I couldn't breathe. I cried harder than I had the day she left, because that was the moment I understood something terrible. I thought I had lost my wife when she walked out the door. The truth was, she had lost her husband years before she ever packed that suitcase. Then I turned the page. It was dated 3 days before she left. And for the first time in 23 years, I was about to learn why. The final entry was dated 3 days before Diane left. My hands were shaking as I turned the page. She had written, "I think I'm going to leave Richard." I stopped reading. For 23 years, I believed she had left me without warning. Now I was reading the warning I had ignored. She continued, "I've thought about this for a long time. Every time I think I'm ready, I remember the young man I married." I closed my eyes. I remembered him too. I was 22 when I met Diane. We talked for hours that first night. I wanted to know everything about her dreams, her fears, her favorite places. I listened to every word. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking. I thought I already knew her. But people don't stop changing simply because we've known them for years. Diane wrote, "Sometimes I still see the young man I married. That's what makes leaving so hard." Then came the words I never expected. "I don't hate Richard. I wish I did. It would make leaving easier." I had spent years convincing myself she left because she stopped loving me. The truth was far more painful. She left while she still loved me. Then I reached the page that answered the question I'd asked her 23 years ago. What more did you want from me? Diane had already written the answer. I don't need a bigger house. I don't need expensive gifts. I don't need another vacation. I just don't want to feel lonely beside the person I love most. Then came the sentence that finally broke me. I want him to look at me when I'm speaking. I want him to care about my answer. I want him to choose me, just once, before his work. I think that's how I know it's over. I don't remember how long I sat there. The sun disappeared. The room became dark. For the first time in my life, I stopped asking, why did she leave? Instead, I asked, why did she stay so long? 31 years. 31 years of asking, hoping, waiting, while I kept believing everything was fine. The next morning, I called Emily. Did Mom ever talk to you about me? Sometimes, she said quietly. Was she unhappy? Yes. I asked the question that had haunted me for years. Why didn't anyone tell me? Emily was silent. Then she answered with one sentence that changed everything. Dad, she did tell you. I couldn't speak. She asked you to spend time with her. She asked you to listen. She asked you to be present. You just thought those things weren't important. I felt something inside me collapse. I had spent 23 years waiting for a warning. I imagined it would sound like I'm leaving. Instead, it sounded like, will you sit with me? Can we talk? Are you listening? Those weren't ordinary questions. They were cries for connection. I just didn't know how to hear them. Before we hung up, I asked one last question. Is Mom happy? Emily smiled. Yes. I nodded. Good. Years earlier, that answer would have made me angry. This time, it brought me peace. Because I finally understood something. The man who made Diane happy wasn't the man she left me for. It was the man I had stopped being years before. A week later, I found an envelope in my mailbox. I recognized Diane's handwriting immediately. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was one page. Richard, I received your letter. I read it twice. For many years I hoped to hear those words. Now that I have, I feel at peace. Please don't spend the rest of your life punishing yourself. We were both doing the best we knew how to do. Then, at the bottom, she wrote, Thank you for finally seeing me. That was all. No invitation, no goodbye, no second chance. And for the first time, I understood that there didn't need to be one. Some people come into our lives to stay forever. Others stay just long enough to teach us the lesson we'll carry forever. Diane gave me 31 years. I spent too many of them believing that providing love was the same as showing it. I was wrong. Love isn't measured by the house you buy or the bills you pay. It's measured in the moments when someone feels seen, heard, and chosen. If I could speak to the man I was at 53, I wouldn't tell him to stop Diane from leaving. I'd tell him to put down the briefcase, turn off the television, sit beside his wife, and listen. Because that's all she'd been asking for. So if someone you love is still reaching for you, don't wait. One conversation, one quiet evening, one honest question can change a life. I learned that lesson at 76. I only wish I hadn't learned it alone. Months passed. One Sunday afternoon, Emily invited me over for dinner. Before I left, my grandson Ethan ran into the living room. Grandpa, will you help me build this? He was holding a small model airplane 20 years ago. I would have smiled and said maybe later. Those two words followed me through most of my life. Maybe later. After work. Maybe later. Next weekend. Maybe later. When things calm down. I never understood that later isn't a promise. Sometimes it's the last chance you'll ever get. So I sat down beside him. We built that little airplane together. When we finished, Ethan hugged me and said, "This was the best day ever." He'll probably forget that airplane someday, but I hope he'll remember that I was there. Because that's all Diane ever wanted from me. Not a bigger house, not more money, not expensive gifts. She just wanted me. If someone you love asks for your time today, don't answer. Maybe later. Because one day, later becomes never. And no amount of success, no amount of money, and no apology will ever buy back the moments you chose to miss.